So, all right. Welcome back, you guys. We're waiting. Eduardo will be jumping in here very, very soon. I expect to see him in a minute or two, but we have a special guest today anyway, so it's good to just get started. Our friend Nicholas Hoyt is here. Nick, I'm gonna get started just by introducing you. Give us a little bit about you, your background, and then yeah, we'll get rolling with all of the things that we're watching this week. Like I said, before we started the recording, not like there's much going on,
Uh,
so it'll be difficult to talk about. But go ahead and fill everyone in kind of on your background and who you are and what you're doing now.
yeah, thank you, Angie. My background is U.S. agribusiness and trading. We have a few projects we're involved with, investing in Argentina, agricultural sector, and climate and weather data, and applying machine learning and artificial intelligence to making, everything from basic everyday cash decisions to a more quantitative approach to markets and risk management. Um, And the intersection right now of trade, South America, North America, weather and markets the timing is interesting as far as what's all going on the geopolitical front.
Let's start, one of the things with your background or your, knowledge of Argentina and Argentina agribusiness and just, with your background in US agribusiness and then seeing what South America looks like. The big story down there this week, of course, is the IMF loan, right? And the changes that we've seen with the Milei administration coming in. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what has been seen, what you're seeing, like how that's impacting, what you're seeing on the agriculture front. Is it impacting anything? And, what is the loan and some of what Milei's doing here? What does that mean in your opinion?
Sure. So first, they have reached an agreement on a new IMF funding facility, 2-year terms. They will finalize it tomorrow. So really, that's kind of the disbursement terms. But the idea right now is that it kind of acts as an economic stabilizer. The country's currency is very strong. They're drawing down their reserves again. One of the main reasons for that is they're paying maturing debt. And a lot of their income source being agriculture here at the end of the crop season is running out. On top of it, they have I wouldn't say artificially strong, but it is a currency that's too strong that is being purposely pegged higher to control and continue to bring down inflation. So the idea now is that with this $20 billion, they will basically have a foreign reserves buffer again, and they can start to follow Milei's path of lifting capital controls. An important, thing to understand is that Argentina's approach to the economy has been primarily a combination of subsidies, regulations, protectionism, and devaluations. When I arrived here 3 years ago, I think I first exchanged money at 177 to 1. I think the cheapest I changed money was 1,400 to 1, to kind of give you an idea of the magnitude. So, and then from there, once they start lifting these capital controls, this is the true structural reforms Milei's promised. And then upon that, Argentina should be able to re-enter global debt markets and start properly refinancing its remaining debt later this year. So that's the path that this agreement opens up. And then on the domestic political front, Milei, the Libra Gate, gave the opposition an opportunity to, investigate, which they're going to pursue. But Milei did have to win a couple big fights in Congress last month just to get to this point with the IMF. So, Argentina is not at all out of the woods, but they're a significant step closer to, a broader reopening, late 2025.
What does it mean for ag in the country, do you think? Like we've seen, you've had crusher. There's Eduardo. It's my bad. I had him with a bad link for the old date. So he was sitting in purgatory. He had no idea what was going on. But
Hey,
sorry,
hello.
Eduardo, welcome. We were just talking about the IMF deal and some of the changes that we have seen in Argentina here recently with fiscal policy. So just getting started. I don't want to say you didn't miss much because I always feel like it's enlightening to hear about what's going on in Argentina from Nick, no matter what. So but it's you didn't you'll be able to catch up quickly.
Okay.
So with the changes in policy, with some of what you're seeing with the discussion of reopening, like what are you seeing that as an impact, or how are you seeing that impact agriculture, like farmer sentiment? Are you seeing any shifts, or because Argentina's farmers obviously have had to basically store crops, hold on to crops. Like there's been accusations of hoarding of grain, right? And some of these other things. You've seen soy dollars, corn dollars, all of these things over the years to kind of try to facilitate the movement of grain and all of that. And Argentina has room to expand. Like, what does this mean in your opinion for Argentina agriculture over the next, let's say, year, and then maybe broaden it out to 5 if you want. If that's too far, then just ignore me.
No, no, it's that I mean that's the big question. So there has been a massive amount of investment, to put it in perspective. In 2 years, Argentina's flipped their energy deficit of $5 billion to a $5 billion surplus. So, but the majority of tax incentives and the fact that the country's governments have lived off of the ag sector, it'll be the last reform. So since the government needs to continue to keep, trust in it, which is in the form of cash dollar reserves, they have to do ag last. So the mindset of of Argentina is hold on to anything that creates dollars. Ag grows dollars, so farmers held soybeans as a result. But you didn't try to maximize production. You didn't invest. Argentina has essentially been starved since 2016 of investment in the ag sector. So now we sit where the real economy is growing. Your main metrics, poverty levels have fallen from around 60% to under 40%. Investments pouring in. Coca-Cola did announce 1.4 billion last week. But ag hasn't done much, and it's simply not going to do much because for about 20 years, every administration has said at some point they'll lower taxes, and they haven't done it. So people just aren't going to believe it until it starts to happen. And even the temporary ones, the movement of the onshore offshore rate has offset the temporary tax reductions that they implemented about 2 months ago. So at the moment, farmers have no more incentive to sell than they did 6 months ago. We've had a jump here in prices. We've seen farmers move. I think last couple of days we had exporters register 400,000 tons beans, 600, 700,000 corn. They'll be able to buy that with harvest coming. But once that harvest push is done, something's going to need to change. The idea is that this IMF is that they will begin to start to be able to forward look at permanent or stepping down the taxes, which is ultimately the big one. Longer term, I mean, Argentina, we are quietly seeing a change. So there are land deals getting done by foreigners. A foreigner could not own directly more than 1,000 hectares under prior administration. So, a lot of any foreign assets that were sitting here were basically stuck. We saw an Australian group, probably about 8 months ago, sold the last kind of major plot, a couple $100 million sales. That was the last big exit. So we've seen Vicentine be able to refinance before their latest trouble. So it's starting to happen, but again, ag will be last. But assuming kind of the two hurdles today, your signals are the midterms, as long as Milei's party continues to gain and these capital controls start to lift, I think the attitude by planting of this fall could be very positive. But even as the attitude gets positive, getting people to invest, to reinvest, seed companies to come down and bring technology. And we are seeing a bit of it, especially on the biofuel side. Some of these things that will ultimately go to Europe. But we just aren't seeing it yet in corn, soybeans. But we're extremely optimistic on the 2 to 5 year window. And to be honest, you know, the trade should be the tariffs, the trade battle should be an opportunity for Argentina for 2 reasons. One is they're probably the best positioned for the current US administration. You know, and they have some other structural advantages, like there's 3 countries, you know, that produce pharmaceuticals in the Western Hemisphere outside the US, and Argentina has the most growth potential. And you could argue in ways they're the most friendly at the moment with this administration. But specifically in ag, you know, food is going, especially in Latin America, is going to become more and more of a focus simply because of China and Brazil's relationship. So Argentina is just a strategic country for this administration. And then the second one is just South American farmers should benefit. You know, Chicago prices more and more should reflect, you know, more US dynamic US fundamentals, and, you know, your cash prices down here should reflect a more open kind of free trade, let's call it. And it shouldn't be lost on everybody that the only president in 2024 who enacted fiscal restraint in the G20, essentially, you know, you could argue China, some of these, but was Milei, was Argentina. So while the US added mountains of debt and most of the developed world added mountains of debt, Argentina shrunk its debt, cut regulations, reduced protectionism, encouraged foreign direct investment. And so, you know, if you continue on that trend, Argentina should be extremely well positioned, both internationally, but specifically in the ag sector going forward.
It's interesting, all of it, just to watch the changes. And at the same time, we have some interesting sort of shifts, you could say, maybe happening in Brazil to a certain extent at the same time. Eduardo, what, and then I want you, because you have questions for Nick yourself, I think, or topics that you want to discuss with him as well. But what is it that you're seeing in Brazil with the shifts that we're seeing in Argentina? Has it impacted the market structure in Brazil or the Brazilian farmer mindset, in your opinion at all? Or is it just kind of shifts that are happening in the region, and it's not much of anything that truly matters on your side? And then we'll shift to the trade war too, because it's just interesting to see how politics and policy can influence farmer sentiment and trade as a whole. So, you know, what are you seeing in Brazil, you know, to the same respect there?
I could say in terms of supply for soybean, we didn't have much to compete with Argentina, for example. For corn, yeah, it's a kind of surprise that farmers selling in Argentina, it's very slow. Maybe because the devaluation of the blue peso, but Nico could comment that much better than me. But corn, orange corn, it's really expensive right now, and it's been good for the West. I mean, there's no competition up to August. Then Brazil comes as the cheapest one. Hey, Nico, what do you think? What's the reason for that? It's only the flat price too low, or anything else that is making the farmer selling corn, farmer selling in Argentina slow, that we haven't seen for the last 6 months? What do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on this government fiscally right now. So the currency is extremely strong, and I'd say 3 months ago-ish, I think you saw banks starting to engage in transactions again. You saw some traditional bank lending in the ag sector is very sporadic. I mean, really, a lot of it hasn't existed for 20 years. So you've seen that try to start to come back now. And it's frozen up here in the last 30, 45 days, waiting on this IMF loan. And then the Libra Gate and the fight in Congress didn't help, and you saw the blue dollar start to move. So the spread there was down to 6.9%. It's back up over 15.20. What that implies is that you could be getting a devaluation. An interesting point on the currency is if you look, there's two very outspoken camps who strongly, one believes that you should dollarize the economy, essentially use a dollar of some form, the one-to-one minimum peg. The other one is you need to control your currency, especially if like when you're in Argentina where your debt is in dollars, your sales are in dollars. Essentially what happens is you become beholden to the dollar. So strong dollar moves, especially in risk-off environments, like what happened this week when Trump's tariffs and then his doubling down caused, the stock market to sell off, 12, 15%. The sell-off in Argentina was even sharper, and not because Argentina did anything wrong this week. It's just because risk-off crushes the yen. So you get during strong dollar periods, especially flights to safety, countries get hit all three ways, and they get hit hard. So like right now, everything in Argentina is a bit frozen simply because if you're a farmer, there's only a couple of ways this government can respond. And the biggest one, especially for everybody who's saying that the IMF loan should be contingent on a devaluation, is that you would expect a big devaluation. And that's historically what Argentina has done. So you can see how farmers who are used to protecting against inflation and waiting for the next devaluation are simply saying, well, if I've got this crop and I got a 10, 15, 20% devaluation coming, which is, more dollars, more pesos in my pocket, it's dollars essentially, then I'm going to wait. So right now, everything's a bit frozen because of that.
Okay. Well, what are your sentiment about the farmer selling? Because we're close, not so close, but we are close to the end of the written sunnies reduction, especially for soybean. Do you think farmers will come and sell a lot of beans and corn up to the end of June? They should, at least.
They should, and again, I think this government, as they get this loan and their buffers the reserves in a better position, they're going to be able to offer some more structural incentives. Again, like lowering those taxes, capping it until June, and then having the currency offset them was really lower farmer income in real terms over the last 60 days. So I think they'll be able to get that back in line where that farmer's going to see 5, 6, 7, 8% more relative to the real world rate. So they should be able to provide a better incentive. And again, a structural one that people can trust will be there in the future. That's kind of the big part. If they just think the government's going to go back to doing the same old thing, they're going to be tempted to put it into bags and not engage again. So, I do think it'll start to pick up, but I think you will see this government they got to close the gap on the currency. They'll be able to, and then as they're in a better position, they're going to have to offer some more tax type incentives that show the capital controls are going to be lifted. But yeah,
as you can see, Andy, to be a farmer in Argentina, you have to be a PhD in economics,
right?
So
that's what it feels like. You have to.
It's very complex.
Yeah, it feels. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I would, in real money, like dealing with real things, like my learning curve here has been about as steep as any in my life. And simply because when you have the dollar, everything is super straightforward, right? 3% inflation and we lose our minds. Like when you don't have the dollar, everything is an arbitrage. So you are immediately calculating what something's worth today versus other things versus the future. So I would say in real applied economics, if you gave me a US economist and a Argentine farmer, I'm, certainly in a matter of, speed, I'd take the farmer.
Well, they've experienced so much in real life versus just contemplating what it looks like on paper. Like, no offense to the economists in the room, but I mean, it's the same thing as, being a merchandiser versus being just an analyst or whatever. Like your experiences are two very different things. It doesn't take away from one versus the other, but when you get real life experience or it's cost you money in the past, it real money in the past, it changes your mindset. Now, the thing that I think is interesting about the conversation you're talking about, where putting it in bags and things like this is one of the topics that we had touched on when Eduardo, Carl, and I talked the last time, was how in this market structure, we had grown so accustomed to over the years, right? Okay, well, the US has this much, we're going to use this much, farmers are going to push this into the market structure because, like you said, when you're dealing with the dollar, it's straightforward. Now, as we've moved a large amount of production into a different part of the world, and we have different factors at play, like currency, like political, persuasion or changes in policy or things like that, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that the grain is going to flow as we think it will. Like just perfect example, Brazil's basis rallying in the midst of a record harvest because people had to figure out where to put it and they weren't moving it into the pipeline once they had discovered where to store. Having said all of that, and knowing that the farmers in South America to a certain extent have figured out how to manage keeping grain out of the pipeline, what is the attitude down there with the Trump administration policies, with the tariffs, with the idea that South American farmers are going to benefit in a big way, from some of these political decisions that we're seeing, from some of these tariffs and things? Has it changed farmer sentiment at all as well, to where they're a little bulled up about, a little optimistic about what they'll receive for prices going forward? If Brazil takes a significant amount of market share from the US into China or anyone else for that matter, they would see a price increase, right? So, what are you seeing from farmers in South America right now, or what are you hearing maybe from folks in the industry about what they expect to have happen down the road as tariffs kick in or don't kick in or whatever? Like, what is your expectation of that? Do you think farmers can hold tighter, or is that something that influences things as we move ahead?
So as far as the farmer in South America being directly impacted, like I think Eduardo's better just because Brazil's going to be far more well positioned to take advantage of this quickly. Argentina's still got too many domestic currency, and you can't forward plan if you don't know you can buy it, procure it tomorrow. And if you don't know what the government policy is going to be tomorrow, they're still stuck in that part of the cycle. One thing that's kind of interesting, like my personal observation, is that in the US, there's a lot of noise because in the same way in Argentina, when it came to the elections, there was a lot of noise. Farmers and really the trade down in other places in the world is very good at focusing on policy. They're not inundated. They don't have the political, emotional connection to a candidate or a party. And US policy rolls downhill exactly like this. The US gets into a fight with China, everybody figures out what it means to them. Okay. And so people are really good at understanding the facts, the policy down here without the emotional, I want my team to win. So I would say people are excited about Trump that are excited about Milei. People that aren't excited about Milei aren't excited about Trump. Trump, Argentina believes in social justice. That's how they ended up going down the path they did 20 years ago. The words Trump uses doesn't resonate. So you've got a similar makeup here. The majority of the ag sector is is fully behind Milei, that people are tired. Everybody in 2023 is saying, we would assume that the left in Argentina gets an extra 5, 6, 7, 8 points in the elections through stuff that is accused of in the US. So, Milei's, where Trump won 50% of the popular vote, 77 million, Milei probably did win 65% of the popular vote. That's a different mandate. So yes, people are excited, especially in the ag sector. but they've been burned too many times. So you aren't going to see them actually do things until the policies change. And for all the excitement of what's going on in the US, their policies aren't changing to resonate. So you're still stuck in a bit of wouldn't say quicksand because you're no longer sinking, but you're not getting out of it yet. I think Brazil is probably, as we see,
in
is the one
Argentina, you have
who
too many fires. You're just like, not now, Trump. We have enough to deal with on our own. Like to a certain extent, like you're focusing on everything that you have to in front of you, right? Until that gets fixed. Really, is what you're saying? Is that what
yeah.
you're? That's
Yeah. I mean,
you know.
it's inflate. We think of inflation in the US as a calculation.
Mm-hmm.
Inflation is not. Inflation is a mindset. Inflation is a way of life. You stop planning for the future because everything in the world becomes a currency short. Your currency is going to be worth less tomorrow and you don't know what it's going to be. So you can't strategically do anything. So everything becomes the here and now. And how do you optimize, get the most out of that and push off your debt obligations? That's all you do. Every decision is made in some form of that capacity. And so that's why you're going to need another cycle of this happening, for people to start to trust. And for those, that opportunity that is the US, China just opened poultry to Argentina. The US just opened high cut beef sales to Argentina. I mean, everything is opening to Argentina. Argentina is going to do more free trade with everybody while the US goes the exact opposite direction. So it's in theory, it's all very good. It just won't happen until people trust it's going to stay.
Takes time, that it's not going to change very quickly. Because historically speaking, like this is the second time in 10 years we have an Argentine candidate that's going to revolutionize agriculture, right? Like is it 13, maybe not 10 years, I think 13 was
the last it was I mean it was me Macri was 15, 16.
Okay, it was
But the last which if you look at a yield chart in Argentina, yields are basically flat to lower since 16. Yeah. And there's a reason for this. The last true optimistic bull market was, that wasn't financial market promises, was 98. So it's been, you can understand why people aren't, running out the doors to put their wagers down. Yeah.
Makes sense. Eduardo, what are you seeing then? Like, what's the attitude in Brazil? Because you've also had a little bit of tumultuous currency, some concern with leadership versus, financial, outlooks, worries over inflation getting out of control, some increases in interest rates of 100 basis points, just the usual stuff in 2025. What is the attitude down there, though, in Brazil when it comes to the changes in policy up here and the idea, like, is there optimism that comes from a shift in potential U.S. policy going forward? First, we'll talk about the farmer side, and then we'll talk about the reality of what can be switched demand-wise and all of that going forward. But let's, farmer sentiment-wise right now, like, what is the attitude down that way when it comes to what's happening here in the US?
Yeah, it is very practical because April is always in Brazil a very seasonal, big farmer selling month. March or April, because April we have a lot of input bills to pay, some loans, and in the last 2 weeks we had a very difficult combination. Farmers want to sell, Chinese crushers want to buy, and in the middleman, the tradings, they are making money. So, which is very difficult to have those three, legs making money. So because of that, farmer selling this month, it's close to 8.5 million tons. Which is very big. I would say this month, April, will be the record high, which makes sense because of the size of the crop. Could be 20 million tons. Depends on the effects in Brazil for sure, but if kept above 590, close to 6, will be good. All the three legs are making money. So because of that, farmers they are taking advantage of this good flat price increase 4 or 5 real per sack, and the new crop for both corn and soybean for 2006. Co-ops in Brazil, they are very active. For example, in Paraná, Mato Grosso do Sul, São Paulo, so around 40% of the area in Brazil. They are very active during April because they know farmers in at this time want to make sure if they will have a profitable crop for the next year. And it's been very good, different from comparing to 22, 23, because of the war, because of the rally in CBOT. They didn't want to, make them barter, because they believed at that time that let me buy the inputs, pay in advance, and wait to sell grains further. And it didn't work because, you know, flat price went down very sharply. And last year and this year, they are doing a very good job in terms of reducing the exposure, at least for the inputs. So barter for the next year is very active, and the farmer selling for 26 is very active too. I would say 10% of farmer selling for next year, and this year 52, 53%. So April has been very good in terms of volume, and China is covering a fast pace the May shipment, June, but they still need to buy July, August, and other. Because of that, the rest of the year, farmers are very confident that China will concentrate their purchases here, and then bases will fly up, and flat prices in the flat price, it's very likely it's going to be they are holding. In the end, they are holding.
It'll stay supported as the buyers come to Brazil, which, in all honesty, right, this was to be expected. China was basically had limited coverage on for May, June. And like you said, they still don't have much coverage on for July or August. And so they had been slow to make those purchases. You had seen basis rally in Brazil throughout harvest, which I think had caught some folks by surprise. And then it had since weakened a little bit, but you'd had seen a 1 day jump after Trump's announcements, right, where basis jumped significantly. And then no one came in, and it softened again shortly thereafter. And so you just kind of, what are the cash market? What is cash price doing? You think it'll just stay supported then at this point as farmer, your farmer selling's been good. The market's been absorbing it. It will likely continue. Have you seen other countries come to Brazil? China, the rumor was they bought 40 cargoes or something like that here in the middle part of the week. Have you seen members of the European Union start asking about beans, or, any of these other countries that the US would still typically be supplying? Have you heard any rumors of shifts at all on the demand side, or no?
No, no. Mainly China, of course. Japan, with its program, it's 1 or 2 cargoes per week, which is not big. But China this week is very aggressive because tradings are selling. Of course, it's a combination.
Yeah.
Yeah, this week we had more than 50 vessels traded, which is the best week since the last October. But the last October, we had 52 vessels traded, CFR China, because the combination of Brazil, the US, and NARD, and Brazil spot and new crop. So this week is really, really amazing in terms of number of vessels traded, because it's almost only Brazil. We had 3 or 4 cargoes traded from ARG for May and June. So basically, is China buying, covering, because of the curve. The structure of the curve is in carry. So it's good for tradings to upload May and June and carry up to August. This carry is amazing, and this is going to lower or to reduce the corn program for July mainly, because
Okay,
it's
yeah.
much more interest to keep buying soybean than corn, to in terms of export. So we have the impact on corn because of that, reducing the size of the program for July mainly.
Let's talk about that because it's the perfect segue to kind of talk about conditions. I wanted to talk about conditions of the safrinha crop is and just get a lay of the land, in what's happening in Brazil and Argentina both. And then I'm gonna look at Nick and have him tell us what's going on in the entire world. I want the rundown on the globe. So I'll give him a minute to get himself prepared if he wants to on anything that we're watching weather-wise, which I know right now it's I think a lot calmer from a weather standpoint than what it was even a couple of weeks ago. But what is how is the crop looking? How's the second corn crop coming along? Eduardo, we're working our way into the middle of April, the important time period. We know what the weather's going to look like probably for at least the next couple of weeks, if not well beyond that. Thoughts on production potential? Any concerns that you're seeing, or are we looking at a relatively respectable second crop? And Nick, you can chime in anytime you want to too on that, of course.
I would let the weather guy speak about the weather,
I
but
thought you might do
the
that.
segment
It
is
was
good.
nice.
In Brazil, we had a few spots here in Paraná, corn that suffered during the Fab, end of Fab. But Mato Grosso, Mapitobá, the whole north of Brazil, Goiás, so all amazing. The corn is very grainy, so the size of the corn is very good. So farmers are very optimistic about the production. But I will let Nico talk about the next five years about the weather. So
Yeah. So, well,
which is
actually, I do have a
much
question
more
for you.
easier than talk about the peso. I would say,
Yeah,
and
honestly,
what is going to the hard farmer will do in terms of marketing for sure.
one of our themes we try to remind people is that weather is uncertain, it's not random. So, a lot of people, because they don't do any work with weather data, they assume it's just anything can happen, but that's not the case. It's uncertain week to week, forecast to forecast. Whereas like Trump's next tweet, like that could be random. That could be a little harder. But no, I actually do have a question though, because one of the main items we had flagged here in the last 2 weeks was safrinha, because like, to be clear, I'm not a weather guy. Like, we focus on crunching a lot of data to say, what does it mean to risks? And what does it mean to anomalies and things we need to be watching for production? At AIQ, we're not here to talk about how the atmosphere is affecting the potential for a drought in June. Like, it's just not something we can trade. It's not something we can make a decision with. So having said that, like, 2 weeks ago, the weather guys seemed to really push this narrative that, March was so dry and the forward forecasts just weren't realizing in Brazil, which, we track that data. We weren't seeing it. I mean, safrinha from the data side of our stuff, from a production standpoint, I think looks pretty good. We've, increased after initially being more worried due to the late planting, which historically ties to low yielding years. Are you hearing like concerns in the countryside? Are you guys, because from our standpoint, like, safrinha looks to be now in pretty good shape compared to where we were, the third week of February. Eduardo, you guys.
Oh, no, no, it's for example, Mato Grosso is it's it's been very good in terms of conditions, and overall the weather is cooler than the normal. For example, during the mornings and during the nights, the temperature is very nice, even though in Mato Grosso, which is not normal. So I would say the production here is it's going to be very very big in terms of safrinha. Could be more than 102 million tons, and there are some tradings using numbers like 105, 110 million tons. So depends on the acreage they are using, but overall, till now, it's been good. Only Paraná, it's like I said, we have some spot, but Paraguay, it's been good. So prediction till now is good, and if we look to the next 15 days, and then it's going to keep raining, and temperatures are not going to rise a lot, so it's good.
And it should be good for coffee, sugar, citrus. I mean, in general, it looks like the center west, into the east
Yeah,
is
I'm not sugar guy, but I would say if São Paulo receive a lot of rains right now, it's not good, but it's not the case.
no, they won't be receiving too many, but it's kind of
Yeah,
right at the end where it's still like last year. I think this time they got some rains that helped. Um, yeah, so Argentina is another one. Things finished well. I think you saw Rosario took corn up a bunch and beans down. We're at 46 and a half in both. We've been here for over 2 months. We went up on beans just on a good finish late. I think one flag in Argentina is just, it was extremely hot in the north this summer, and there was no chicharita. And when you look at the size of the cuts they made last year, there could just be more corn out there. So, I think you kind of have a similar problem to Brazil, where I don't think anybody would bet their job within 5 million tons. They know how much beans they produced last year. And so, and I think, or to some degree, and I think you have a similar problem with this year. I don't think the chicharita problem was probably that bad. So maybe you have more corn out there, which gets carried in. So, but in general, Argentina finished well. Main places watching is Europe's gotten a lot better. They had a little bit of a dry forecast 10 days ago. The UK is just one area that's been extremely dry in the Southwest. Ukraine, Russia have gotten a lot better. Russia's still quite variable, but it's gotten a lot better, especially from in December when people were marking crops sub 80 for no reason. But just that whole region, Kazakhstan's pushed out quite a bit more. The stands were not in great shape 2 months ago. India's heat just doesn't look like it's causing as big of a problem as we would have thought. Which again, they have a lot of irrigation. We know that, but still, like, they were extremely hot. China's crops could be another record, even with generally persistent drought in that kind of Shandong and Anhui area. So there just really isn't a lot of problems today. The only place that I think is of South Africa is going to have a good crop. The only place of interest really is kind of the U.S. into Mexico, that Southwest. Northwest Mexico, Baja down to Sinaloa is where they grow quite a bit of corn and most of their wheat. That's just staying dry, and then they should continue to be a very good buyer of U.S. grain. And the plains, Kansas, a lot of that area is just kind of drying out again. You did get some rain, so you're kind of pushing away from the worst case scenarios. But there's nothing that is taking the world's balance sheet and saying we should be super comfortable. But we've marginally added 2-3 million tons of wheat, 1 million tons of soybeans, 1 million tons of corn here in the last, call it since March, or since March 20th, maybe, when things generally got quite a bit better. So at the moment, you're kind of back in this wait and see mode. And you could make a strong argument that the price after these tariffs to grow corn in the US. It continues to rise, the cost. And the world is certainly not more comfortable. But are buyers in the current environment willing to go extend further? And then the one place I'd say also that we've been watching close, because it was Turkey, and they've gotten a lot better. So I mean, that whole region, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, has just gotten quite a bit of rain versus how dry they were. So we don't, it's the focus here that we were looking for potentially like a pretty big last half April weather period. It's kind of gone. I think now, we're going to turn very quickly to US planting, and it's drying out. They're going to get off to a good start, which usually indicates, the potential for more corn acres. You get out there and you roll. Nothing in the price changes would suggest that's not the case. I think, your biggest issue is just might be, fertilizer availability. I don't know how big of an issue that is. So no, I think weather has kind of gotten a little boring again, which, the last thing we need right now is a weather problem on top of everything else.
Yeah, I think we're already kind of drowning when it comes to the daily news flow.
Yeah.
Carl, anything that you want to ask, chime in on, thoughts that you have before we wrap it up? We don't want to go too awful long, though. There's so much to talk about. It's one of those things where it's not easy to make it super quick, or it's not as beneficial to. But go ahead.
Eduardo, do you see a shift in Brazilian production to maybe, and when I guess I say a shift, every year we see what 2-3% increase in Brazilian production, give or take. If the US and China continue to heat up these trade tensions, do you think that maybe we see a 5 or 6% increase in production? I mean, and I'm just throwing a number out, but do you think we can see inflated production in Brazil because of the trade war with China?
Well, it's very important for sure, but I don't think so. 2%, 3%. It's because of the environmental issues are not so easy to. I'm going to give you one example. I have a client in the frontier of Mato Grosso and Goiás. This region is very new in terms of crop. 5 years at least. Then we have some problems that tradings can't buy their beans from this region. Because of that, this client will plant, for example, a summer crop, which is not good for the center of Brazil because of the nights are very, very hot. But they have to plant because they had no option in terms of who to sell who is going to buy my beans, or who is going to sell fertilizer or seeds. That's a problem. So because of the environmental in Brazil, I think it's very difficult to see a 5%, 6%. Because the last 5 years, for example, soybean acre increased more than that, 4%, 5%, because part of this growth we took from summer crop, corn summer. And then, but we didn't have much more corn summer crop to take and to switch to soybean. I would say, Carl, 2-3% is the baseline. More than that depends on the environmental cash loans, which is not being cheap, for example, to open up a new areas. So 2-3%, I think.
Okay.
It's a good number, good bet.
Thank you.
Which is big.
Well, it's still, I mean, it's 3% of today's acres, not 3% of 1980s acres. So I mean, it's a big jump, but I just like I said, wondered if maybe Brazil wanted to slip in a little more production if they had bigger exports, but I see what you're saying. So thank you.
Okay, no problem.
All right, any additional thoughts we want to leave the attendees with before we call it a week and look ahead to next week and see what's happening? Anything that you think we should be watching or that is important to be paying attention to in the ag space for the next few days?
Well, I see we have a question here, and I think
Oh, good. Yeah, look at you. You're better than
just
me.
who's going to bear the brunt of this tariff? And I think it's important, it's important to understand that in a normal tariff world, like, dealing in Argentina, we deal with a lot of like tariffs, VATs, things like this. But Europe, most countries have these. In a normal tariff world, it's a tax on corporate profits, and countries use this to control. Governments use it to control things outside of their control. A company wants to originate dollars, they don't want to sell domestically, blah, blah, blah. This environment's different. And it's, if you go back to 1718, when the first trade war happened, soybeans were the main export to China. So they went after them because it was the biggest target. What's different this time is that by declaring financial warfare on all fronts is that, there's going to be an extra incentive to go after Trump's base, and especially Congress's base, because tariffs should normally fall under that. So soybeans in agriculture in particular will be far more targeted. So where I'm going with this is that in a normal trade environment, the companies, some of it would bleed into the farmers. It would primarily be probably companies doing business, margins shrinking across. Agriculture is also more strategic, it's food. But in this one in particular, especially with the voting base, I don't see any way that this is not borne by the US taxpayer in a massive way. Some of it can go to other places, but at the end of the day, we got a $40 billion bailout a month ago. They're already talking about 20 some. There will be more. Nobody in the US is planting cotton because it's economically viable. Or not nobody, but a lot of them aren't. So you're already, in this case, like this is, the majority of this ag one is going to end up being borne by the US taxpayer, is my belief, just from the standpoint of midterms coming. The first Grassley had already come out and questioned Trump's kind of using the executive order for something that by decree, by law, falls under Congress. So it's going to be a US taxpayer funded from the agricultural side.
I could see that. Sorry, my printer just decided to start printing all on its. I think it just hit the internet or something. You gotta love HP. So sorry about that. But no, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think that we none of us know. It's like you just said earlier, where it's like uncertain versus completely unpredictable to a certain extent. And at this point in time, it's easy to be like, well, if this happens, then this will happen, right? And these types of things based on the last go around. But I think this administration's proven that at any moment, what you think and what they decide to do will look very different, which makes for great entertainment, not so great future planning.
Well, and then specific to ag, I kind of say that the rest of them, the larger, broader ones, are going to be borne by the entire supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah, the ag ones, I think that makes sense, and we'll see how it all plays out. The White House, while we were on the call, the White House clarified that China tariff rates are actually 145%, not 125%. Just in case you were wondering, that extra 20% is super important. And beans are still up 12.
Here in Brazil, the Brazilian tourists, but we have two reasons to go abroad.
Yeah.
For example, go to the US. One is to travel, take pictures, post in Instagram, whatever.
Yeah.
And the other is shopping. I think the US tourists will discover what is the Brazilian experience. Go to somewhere else to buy, for example, an iPhone.
Right. I have to
Yeah,
get my enhanced driver's license to be able to go to Canada so I can get my iPhone
yeah.
going
Which is,
forward.
in the end, it will be fun. Funny
That's
because, you make two things, travel and buy stuff.
We get it. It'll give us lots to talk about. So, well, I thank you guys. I thank everyone for tuning in, and really thank you for your time and your insight. I really can't tell you enough, how much I appreciate just being able to pick both of your brains, all three of your brains, but Carl's obligated by law to let me pick his. So, it's one of those deals where I appreciate it. We'll be back next week with a lot more to talk about, I'm sure. If you
Sure.
guys have questions in the listening audience and you want to throw them at me, please do. We'll do a Q&A one of these days. So no, I appreciate it, and we'll be back. We'll be back next week. Have a good one, guys.
See you
Thank
guys.
you.